I think we will go ahead and get started.
Let's go.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello and thank you for joining us for this afternoon's community and parent partnership conversation, where we will address racial equity in schools through community engagement. I'm Nikki Charles. I'm with the Pew Charitable Trusts. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am currently in the Research Triangle, which is originally the land of the Occaneechi and the Lumbee tribe. If you are interested to learn more about which tribe you are currently residing on or living from or watching from, I am putting the land map in the chat just to share, and if you're interested. But before we get started and dive into the conversation, I would love to let our panelists, our distinguished panel, introduce themselves. And I think maybe we'll go in the order of the screen in which I see them. So Danita, would you mind going first?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danita Mason Hogans, and I am what I call an education activist. I've been doing education activism for 35 years, and my work primarily deals with historical narrative and power, and how that historical narrative has played out to disenfranchise people, and how we can use the political power and the people power we have to subvert some of these narratives and some of the ways that we have been taught to learn.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited about this panel. Dr. White, why don't you go next?
Good evening, everyone. Can you see me? Okay, great. So good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Carol White. My pronouns are she, her, and I am from Wilson County in Wilson, North Carolina. My role in the community varies. I'm a community advocate in multiple roles, several organizations, but today I am here as the education chair for the Wilson NAACP. Our motto is Stronger Unified, and we have a focus for the Education Committee of building community through partnerships. We've written 3 grants, and we have had about 7 forums. And in those forums, we discuss with the community the impact of incarceration, how it affects communities, how it affects families, how it affects children. And so we've emphasized the economic impact, the trauma that it often has for families, and the disconnect in communities. We currently have a grant through the Vera Foundation looking at dismantling the prison pipeline through restorative practices. And with that, we work with our school district, we work with the court system, we work with the DA's office, the sheriff's department, police department. So we have a broad net of organizations that we work with, including now engaging our faith base. A little about myself is that I am an A&T Aggie, first and foremost. My undergraduate degree is from North Carolina A&T. I am a STEM major, science and mathematics. I served as a STEM teacher for about 15 years and then moved into administration. I received my master's from Virginia State University and my doctorate from East Carolina University. So I've served as a principal. I worked at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction and as a central office administrator. And I'm very pleased to be here today.
My name is Fernando Martinez. I am a community organizer with Education Justice Alliance. I have done public education organizing with African American and Latinx parents for almost 15 years, a little more than 15 years. I have done that in Alabama. I have done that in New Jersey. I did support in other groups in the Southeast at one point for a national campaign. And since 2012, I have been doing education organizing in Wake County, North Carolina, and also North Carolina. Some of the things that I have worked with is on recruiting, training parents, having conversation with parents about how public education system works, what their rights, responsibilities, where to get the information, who the right people to go to talk to when they have problems, and also, mainly supporting parents in identifying what the problems are with the children's education and who the right office is to go and try to solve the problem. Also on civic engagement, trying to get parents to attend public education, to attend Board of Education meetings and speak at Board of Education meetings when it's needed, monitoring some of those working groups, and also elevate their voices in a dignifying way where they can be heard and where they can actually get the information that they need. I think I pretty much answered all the questions, but if there is something I'm missing, let me know.
Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, we also have Roxanne Dixon joining the panel.
Hello, are you able to see me better now? I've moved locations because I keep on hearing that you couldn't see me. Are you able to see me now?
We can see you.
Okay, and you see me not? Okay, my name is Roxanne Dixon. I am a parent advocate. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. My main focus is making sure that the children in different public schools have a voice. I am a parent of a DPS student, and I noticed when I went to those schools that many of the parents in those localities could hear about meetings, could hear about events, but didn't feel like their voices were heard. So it made me very interested in making sure that when we stand together and we are united, we can make sure that our children are included in those things that people may feel are important to everyone, but everyone needs an opportunity to be counted. Everyone's voice needs to be heard. So when I was in my son's elementary school, I was on the Title I PAC team. And now that he's in middle school, I've joined the different groups within that school so I can make sure that we are working together to make sure that our children meet their full potential.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. So we will jump right in. We have a lot of really juicy questions. And just a reminder, the panelists can jump in on any of the questions. We will start with one person just to get the conversation going. So I think couching the conversation in some definition is always helpful. So we will kick it off by allowing some of our panelists to describe racial equity in the community. What does it mean to you? How would you describe it? And how is it specifically relevant in your role? And Dr. White, if we can maybe start with you.
Okay, so I think we have to start first by defining what equity is. And so when we start looking at equity, I choose to define it as the practice of ensuring that everyone, regardless of race, gender, identity, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic backgrounds or status, sexual orientation, whatever the difference may be, that everyone, with regard to those, are afforded access to the same services and opportunities that others have. In other words, how do we level the playing field? How do we ensure that resources, materials, finances are distributed equally for all of the persons in those different groups? In order to do that, as a community advocate, one of the things is that we have to be sure that we first understand what that means, that we remain neutral in our opinions and focus on what the facts are. So know your community well, know what the resources are, know the needs of your community, and then have policies and be aware of what the policies are at your local and your state level. And be sure that you are building bridges that connect people and resources and not walls that separate them.
Thank you so much. Fernando, can you also weigh in on this question? How would you describe racial equity in the community advocacy space?
Sure, thank you. It's hard to follow Dr. White's statements on equity and racial equity, but following some of the one of her comments about leveling the playing field for everybody, for Education Justice Alliance, racial equity basically mean acknowledging and recognizing that the field is not level for everyone, that there are structural barriers, that there are many years of policies that actually have made that field more favorite for one particular group over others. Recognizing that systems have a responsibility of recognizing that there are systematic racial injustices in their own system. No one person individually, but the system as a whole in practice and principle keep perpetuating and keep exercising those racist policies that are keeping basically Black and Hispanic and other immigrant groups down. So when we think about racial equity in the school context, we think about imagining two different type of neighborhood schools. One where that school is actually have everything that they need. They have all the resources, a nice band and a nice sport program, and all these things that are science lab, and you name it. They have everything that the students need, recognizing that for the most part, those families that send the students to those schools are in the majority white families. And recognizing that there are other neighborhood schools where we are over policed, we have metal detectors, there is trash, there is a lot of challenges in the school system itself about engaging families, lack of interpretation services for new families, lack of attendance for the back to school night, you name it. You kind of like see all these barriers at the lowest graduation rates of the school district, and recognizing that those families are primarily Black, Hispanic, and other minorities. And that has been actually done on purpose for years and years of systematic policies that are actually encouraging some of those students to access, for example, to the gifted and talented programs, right? Almost 60% of the students access to gifted and talented program are either Asian or white, primarily white students. But then when you actually see the numbers, of Black and Latinx and Hispanic students accessing to those services are very low, right? And there are many reasons for that. There is what we call the push-out problem and what we call the keep-out problem, right? Which I will be happy to talk about that later. So that's for Education Justice Alliance, racial equity in the school setting is basically recognizing that years of intentionality to keep people down, and actually being willing to correct the wrongs that have been done to the families. And if that means investing more money in those families that need it the most, we have to invest more money in those families that need it the most.
Thank you. So I think because Fernando started to addressing some of the structural issues, this might be a good chance for us to flip one of the questions around and address a little bit of the power dynamic. So one of the questions is, how is power used in creating policies? And how is that detrimental to serving our students and their needs? Danita, could you go first on this one? If not,
sure, I'd love to. As I said, I'm an educator, and I started with this. Trajectory in education. It became quickly apparent to me that I really needed to focus my work on historical narrative and power, because a lot of the policies that our children are subject to are rooted in this power. And as a seventh generational Chapel Hillian, it's also very important to see the historical narrative and how that has played into these power dynamics. I think a lot of times as educators and those people who are advocating for education for our children, we focus a lot on principle and perspective. We really don't look at the power dynamic as much as we should. If you look at a historical narrative, a lot of these policies that are detrimental to providing equity and providing education for all of the folks are rooted in white supremacist power. If you look at Kent Plummer Battle, who was president of UNC, he was also the state superintendent of North Carolina schools and partnered with organizations such as the Daughters of the Confederacy, and even had an influence in HBCUs to talk about how we could become better servants to the white establishment that was in power. And this is important to know, because these same systems that were created years and years ago, these same power systems are really just reinventing themselves in 2021. And these systems that are rooted in this particular power are the reasons that Chapel Hill Carrboro, for instance, has the second largest achievement gap in the country and the greatest wealth gap. These things did not occur. They were occurring because of systemic change and power dynamics. And I also would like to say, so at the climate that we're in right now, we need to understand that people who are in positions to make these decisions that affect our children, a lot of them are elected. And what I study is civil rights history too. And so I can't necessarily, I see the intersection between education and this civil rights history. And I look at some of the people on the right now, and what they're doing is really using some of the tactics that Black folks used in the 60s against us. If you look at people like Ella Baker, Septima Clark, they had what was called citizenship schools. And they grew from their community, people to be on the school board, people to be at local elected officials. And they were the ones that made the policy decisions that benefited the community. And I don't think that we do enough of that. But I think in order to do that, we really have to understand what that power dynamic is and how it plays itself out, because a lot of times the people who are most affected by these policies, we don't see at these collaboration tables. And I think it's because people in power are not mindful to make sure that the people who are most impacted by these policies are at the table. But what I'd like to say finally is that what I firmly believe is the people are never without power. So what I think our challenge is, and certainly my challenge as an advocate, is to interrogate ways to combine that power, to make that power known, and then put the power to use. And that's exactly what's going on the right. We have people who are running for office and running for these positions, have never been educators, have never had any type of association with schools, but what they do have is connections to people with wealth, money, and the ability to put people in power to employ their resources. But that is also the historical narrative and the beginning of the North Carolina public school system. Until we deal with that history and that power, I think we're just going to continue to spin our wheels. So I think we need to get real serious and all of us become organizers in our children's education.
Thank you so much. I do want to give an opportunity to hear from Roxanne about the power dynamic from the parent perspective. So Roxanne, can you weigh in on how you see power being used to create policy and how it's detrimental to our students and their needs?
Yes. One thing I noticed in certain schools, we have all these committees that are supposed to support the children at large. Like, for example, the site committee, it's supposed to represent 3/4 of the school's body. So that means those people should be elected by the majority. So you should have people speaking out with their voices in that particular school. But what happens is you have, like you say, people choosing who they want on these committees, scheduling meetings at times that are inconvenient for people, making it unavailable for people, or giving them the information in an untimely fashion. So for me, the power dynamic is knowledge is power, but you're keeping people who are supposed to have the voice, the people who are supposed to show up at these meetings, and then you try to turn the tables and make it appear that it was disinterest that allowed us not to be there, as opposed to saying that it was either inconvenient or we didn't have the knowledge to attend the meeting. And when you say that you're supposed to pick someone, if it's supposed to be picked by a majority, then if your school if you have 3/4 of your school is Hispanic or African American, then you should have 3 representatives on that particular committee to represent your children's voices. But that doesn't happen. We see that the majority are picked either by the principal or someone from the PTA, or that those dynamics within the school is something that we have to be concerned about as well. Not only outside legislation that's systematically making it impossible for them to send correct funding to our schools, but also the dynamics within the school that they're trying to make sure that people are not available because you didn't give them the proper information. So I think that's how that power dynamic works within the school system.
Very powerful. We're seeing a few themes, right, about the political climate, which Danita mentioned, and the narrative. We heard that in the opening talks yesterday with Nicole also mentioning that it starts with the narrative, right? And it begins the power shift and leads into policy. And we're in such a crazy political climate right now. There are impacts. So maybe we'll go to that question next. How is the current political climate impacting community and parent partnerships with schools? Anything, feel free to go to the pandemic and mask mandates, loss of human capital. There's also the mental health aspects. There's so many layers to this. Dr. White, why don't you take that one first for us?
Okay, so we know that education is power. There would not be a struggle against education. And there has been a war with education, public education, for decades. And it does have to do with power. If there's not education, then there's automatically a divide. There's a divide between those that are informed, who's involved, and who's included. So one of the areas is during this pandemic has been the lack of access to technology, broadband, and high-speed internet. And that has been a major concern for me. Because when you look at it, it has been one of the most powerful dividers that we have had. It has caused an even wider equity gap in education. When you look at the fact that we already had situations where disadvantaged and disenfranchised people did not have access to qualified teachers, materials, and distribution of financial resources. And we know all of that happened because of the Leandro case. And when you look at Leandro, which has never really been settled anyway, it's still just going from one judge to another judge with that. But when you look at the unfair distribution of resources, and then you go back and you look at your technology and your broadband. Right now, you had over 60% of households in some of the rural counties that did not have high-speed internet during the time that it was needed for learning. Over 20% of them didn't even have a computer to use in a lot of the rural areas. So if you take a look at that, and they're looking at the Boston group, and I'm sure you may be familiar with that, but they estimated that over 468,000 K-12 students in North Carolina do not have reliable high-speed internet. And that over 355,000 don't even have an adequate device. 37% of rural versus 21% of urban communities don't even have the lines laid to have high-speed internet. So when we start talking about even playing fields, and when we start talking about divides and inequities, that has been a huge divide. Because if you look at that, and also look at the fact that you have your voucher system, there is nothing equitable about what happens with voucher systems. And if you're familiar with how those work, then you know that a student can go to a school, they say school of choice, but is it really a school of choice? Especially if you have a lottery system for me to get in and I have to meet certain qualifications to getting in. Is that a school of choice? For some, yes, for some, no. And then when you look at that, you're supposed to have free, equitable public schools that provide access to the community. Okay, so schooling in your community, schools in your community is more than about schools. For decades, for centuries, they have been a center for minorities to meet, to plan, and in some cases to even decide how they are going to survive. It happened at that schoolhouse, right? So when you start dismantling schools, you also start dismantling communities, right? Because where there used to be a school in my community I could walk to and get that information, now I may not have a school within miles of where I live. And then we start talking about how people are informed in the community. If I don't have technology to even get the message, then I don't have a voice and I'm not at the table. So when we start talking politics, we have to talk a little bit more than about the mask mandate, critical race theory. All of those play into it. But let's look at some of the root causes of why people don't have access.
Ooh,
And I can
snap,
just
snap,
go on.
clap, clap.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to add to my Aggie sister, Dr. Wright, and what she said. And I also would really like to uplift a lot of the things that Roxanne said. You know, a lot of times we often don't think of the PTA and the SIT team or the school improvement teams as power structures, but they most definitely are. These are the folks who have the principals or who have the governing ear of the body. And these are organizations that a lot of times are predominantly white and leave out folks who look like me in the classroom and certainly in the decision-making. And I would like to say that the pandemic really has highlighted a lot of these inequities. And, you know, one of the things that we came up against with, I work with 4 other Black women known as the Justice League in Chapel Hill. We have all interest in educational justice. Shout out to Diane Jackson. But what we did was come together and try to identify solutions centering the parents who are going to be affected by these policies during the pandemic and try to find out solutions. And what we heard was a lot of things that I think would be beneficial for folks who are governing the schools to understand. So for instance, there was one parent who would take her child to school, take her child with her to work so that and leave her in the car while the parent went to work every day. And she was doing that, number one, because they did not have access to a good system of broadband. They didn't have a good access to that. So this is one way that the young woman could do her homework, but also she didn't have childcare, and she didn't have money to pay somebody to take care of her. While a lot of people who did have that power, who are particularly, a lot of them are on the SIT team and PTA and have that informational network going on. They had these things called pods where they would hire teachers who had not been a part of the school to educate their children, and that made the divide greater. So in my district, where it's only 34% of Black kids originally were prepared to go to college, after the pandemic, those numbers are as low as 28% of our children being prepared for college. And part of that is because you don't have people like Roxanne at the table to talk about how these things are impacting us. And I just wanted to lift up what you said, Roxanne, because those are very much power structures that operate within the schools as well. And that's why people can come and yell at school board meetings and jump up and down and act crazy, because they have the organizing ability and they have the power structure put together to go and try and intimidate people with their money and with their organization. But then again, as I said, the people are never without power, and we need to start organizing.
That is the perfect segue, I think, to where I might go next. And I'm going to build in one of our audience questions. And I want to go back into that piece that Dr. White said earlier, that when these attempts to dismantle schools, public schools specifically, you also dismantle community. However, there's power in community. So I'm going to make this kind of a threefold question, and you guys should feel free to jump in. So what are the gaps that community organizations and partners can fill? How do we build partnerships where parents and community are considered assets? To this point of, we don't value the voice. And I still haven't met a parent that doesn't care about their child's education. I think we make it difficult sometimes to show how we care. Right, might be the other part. How can we build partnerships? And the questions from the audience was, and how can we build coalitions across racial groups? Because there is also an attempt and an effort to separate the racial groups. And so it feels a little bit like we're nibbling at scraps when there might be power in combining. So I will open that up to all of you, and you can take some of it, all of it. Fernando, you might want to talk about your
Sure.
experience with the racial question.
Sure. When I moved to a specific city and I introduced myself with some of the city leaders there as a community organizer, some of them were very happy to see me, and they were like, we're gonna support you a lot because you're coming to do good work and organize Latino parents. Obviously, because I am originally from Latin America, and as well, so they assumed that I came to organize Latino parents only. And long time ago, I made my point being that I also experienced living in the South. I live and organized about 6 years in the deep South in Alabama, across all the state of Alabama. So I had to relearn history from the people that are directly affected by the history and shaped by the history. So I made my point from then that I will not work or focus on one particular group over the other one, but we must build true and honest Black and brown solidarity when it comes to building those coalitions that we're talking about. So I can tell you that I have been able to work and build those coalitions in many places that I live by bringing people together, by implementing more listening tools rather than talking at people. And those of you that do restorative justice and healing circles know what I'm talking about. Building those relationships, gather people, learn about the history, through documentaries, movies, or whatever it is, but also create those safer spaces as safer as they can be, right? Because one may challenge me on the safer space idea, but creating those spaces for people to actually talk about their own history and about their own struggles and come together and identify common ground and be able to work together towards changing the school policy more specifically. So when we think about how we can create that, we need to intentionally keep investing in those kind of approaches, invest in translating documents, invest in having bilingual people in the space, invest in identifying and allowing people to self-identify what the background is and respecting and following the leadership of those directly affected. But when it comes to the gaps, one thing I want to say real quick, because I don't want to dominate the whole conversation, is that one of the Education Justice Alliance platform is about relationship-centered schools. What do we mean by relationship-centered schools? Basically, what we are saying is that the school leadership, right, starting from the principal, area superintendent, and all the other people in the school level, including cafeteria workers, bus drivers, volunteers, we all need to make that core part of our work, right? Make that principle, that value, relationship-centered schools. We're here to build relationship with this child. We're here to build relationship with this child's family, right? So we know, for example, if the child have been incarcerated at the border, put in those cages that they were put in those cages some time ago. And when they come to the school building, they are full of traumas and fears, and something is gonna trigger to that student, something that the teacher or the bus driver or the police that is placed in the school has said to this child, trigger the fear and the traumas. And instead of we referring them for a suspension, we actually deal with that because we have that ongoing two-way relationship with that family, right? Relationship-centered schools is about having a caring adult being able to listen to that child and what the needs are. And that's how we can identify, and that's how we're going to continue building community schools, and that's how we're going to support the families. Because if we have 2 ears, we have only one mouth. Do the math. We're supposed to be listening more to those children, to those families, to those classroom teachers, than actually talking at them and being able to work with them based on what their needs are.
Thank you. Relationship-centered. Anyone else want to chime in on the barrage of questions I threw at you?
I kind of like to add on to what was just said, and it is so important. He hit on so many key areas. And one of those is, there's an old adage that used to say, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And I'm sure most of you have heard that over and over and over. And I heard that caring part in there. I heard that listening part in there. You know, do some surveys. We've done a community survey. What is it that, and I say again, know your community. What do they really need? Don't assume what they need. Know what they need. And when you do that, do they need clothes? Is there food insecurity? We've done forums on and workshops on food insecurity. You know, where do I find food? How do I get clothes? How do I connect with people at housing and get some place to stay? You know, all of those kind of things come into play as well. And I really want to thank him for emphasizing that. But doing things during this pandemic to fill the gap, people have been very cautious about having externals come into the school because of the pandemic. And so one of the things that we were doing was tutoring in the school and helping out in face-to-face situations. But if you can't do that because maybe can't volunteer right now, but you can still ask the school things like, what do your children need? Can we purchase some clothes that go in your clothes closet, or donate some clothes for your clothes closet? Can we put some food in the food pantry? Can we help with some instructional supplies for your closet for children who may not have everything that they need? Can we help you write some grants? Can we help you get the information out into the community that you're having certain things and you want people to get there? One of the things we did, we paid for some, we're in a rural town. We're not in a large urban system that has massive transportation from door to door. We have a small transportation system in Wilson. It's called rideshare. So we purchased the card for our school that we adopted so that parents could have rides back and forth to the school free of charge. So it's doing those kind of things to help in this time when you talk about gaps. Those things matter.
And the only way you know what the gaps are is to build relationships with your stakeholders, right? So there's a tie here. Danita or Roxanne, you wanna add to our colleagues?
I would like to say one thing I think some organizations do, to Dr. White's point. You have a resource and you bring me the resource and you're basically telling me what I need, as opposed to asking me what I need or making it convenient for, if you say, for example, we have free books, but the books are downtown and I don't have a car, or it's not in location to where I am. So I think what we need to do is think about all the parameters of the event. You have events where you're maybe giving out food, but you didn't ask the people, if I'm a vegetarian or don't eat certain things for religious purposes, dietary purposes, if you gave me something I still can't eat, then you really didn't help me. You gave me a resource I may be able to bless somebody else with, but I think taking the time to build a relationship, to ask someone their name, to ask, and I think too, we need to stop being so familiar within ourselves. Like, we know what the acronyms mean when we're talking about different organizations, but we don't reverse our perspective and say, okay, you may not know what the food bank is. So, hi, my name is, and this is the resource that I have for you. And if that doesn't help you, then I can send you someplace else. So I think it's taking the time to make sure that not only is the resource available, but that I can get to the resource that you're offering me.
Yes. Build the relationships, ask the right questions, know what your folks need, and don't make assumptions. Thank you so much, Roxanne. We are now in the phase, and we've been building in a few audience questions, but there is an interesting one. There are two that I will kind of combine. And I'm on the funder side as well. I am a grant maker in my day job, so this is a good question to me, and I like talking money. What should funders be funding, and how can philanthropic or corporate partners be part of the solution and not perpetuate inequities? And then there was a specific question about, which I think goes with Dr. White's point about some programs. Where do you get funds for these types of programs, I'm assuming they're the kind of programs that you mentioned with the ride share, et cetera. Are they grants? So for the grant maker who asked that question, I think that's one way, right? Is you can fund some of the programs that Dr. White addressed. But are there other ways and other things that funders should be funding?
I'd like to ask I would like to answer that a little bit. And I see my little dog is running to the door. So if he starts barking, you just go to somebody else and I'll be back. But I'd like to answer that because maybe about 4 years ago, I embarked upon an educational program for the descendants of the enslaved of UNC, who actually built UNC and who were escheated or given to the university to fund the university to address the achievement and opportunity gap that we have in North Carolina. So initially in Chapel Hill, I was proposing that university fund these scholarship programs for these young people. Later on, after I found out what happened with the Husband Journalism School with Nicole Hannah-Jones, and again, we're talking about power and how that power dynamic played itself into what really happened was the person who had the most money in the program had the most power, but they also had the power to pull a potentially powerful advocate for not only people at UNC, people in the community were at those protests too, because we understood how important it was to have the historical narrative there. So after we did that, what we decided to do is to have a crowdsourced way of funding our initiative so that people would not have, so number one, all the people would have ownership in terms of making this thing come into fruition, but more importantly, we would not be beholden to a particular power base, and we could just get in and do what we needed to do, which I find is a trend when I sit in a lot of grant writing circles now, since we've had the conversation about equity. What I find is people are realizing that a lot of times what they thought they were funding were community programs. What we ended up funding were gatekeepers who took the money, and then typically Black women would be doing the work or enacting the work of these programs. And I think a lot of that really quickly comes back to what Roxanne was uplifting in terms of making assumptions about people and their needs, but without having them at the table. So it's very clear that Dr. White has done her research and knows the needs of the community because she has those folks there. And to Fernando's point, my other job is doing oral history work and centering those people who are there. I find it very interesting that we don't understand how important it is to have people who have been there for generations at the table. There should not be any type of conversation about the future of education for children who've been disproportionately affected by inequities without having generational people at the table. When we are looking into what happened in January 6th, we need witnesses to talk about what happened. How have you been impacted and how have you been injured? That's the first process we do. Yet in order for people to talk about the educational program that their grandmother, their great-grandmother and great-grandmother have been subject to, a lot of times they're left out of these conversations. And I think we have to address racism. I also know that we have to address classism, because typically we have the same people at these tables when we need to have people for whom the education system did not work out, so that they could give us strategies and we could submit ourselves to their learning. So that's what I'd like to say. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you so much. That is, again, the theme with Nicole Hannah-Jones yesterday, right? Narrative matters, oral history matters. We know that we all have cultural contexts and nuances. There's a reason that folks try to silence us, right? Anyone else want to spend this funder's money? I also want to highlight that what Fernando said earlier, right? Simple things, translation, interpretation, anything that makes everything accessible is really, really important, and also not free. So I think that's sort of the low-hanging fruit. But Fernando.
Yes, I'll keep it quick. Basically, and I don't mean to offend anyone. Nikki, please know everybody who might be in the line that are program officers or individual donors. I don't mean to offend anyone, but let's just be honest, and I'm an honest person. Oftentimes, philanthropy is part of the problem. And the same way we are engaging in a conversation about race equity in public education, when we look at the numbers, right? We have 22% of Black students in the school district receiving 65, 75% of all the school suspensions and referrals to criminal juvenile court. Philanthropy is the same way. We need to decolonize philanthropy. We need to invest in those communities that need it the most. We need to hire more Black program officers, more Latinx program officers, more Arabic program officers. We need to decolonize philanthropy. If your institution is not ready to engage in a conversation about reparations and give the money away to those organizations that are really doing the work at this time, maybe helping them with creating some other way for investing the money so they can be sustainable, or create a program that they could be sustainable. If you're not ready to engage in that conversation about giving your money away, I strongly encourage you to at least think about bringing Black and brown people to the staff. Let's just be honest. Foundations are too wide. I don't mean any offense to anyone, and when you bring people that look like me, like you, like me, they're basically tokenizing us, right? They're actually creating this race equity program or protect the immigrants program to give some money away. They give us $5,000, $3,000. But if a white-led organization comes with an idea, it's just a memo, oftentimes not even an application, and get $500,000 or more to do the work. And I know that because I've been in a relationship with program officers. So I'm not inventing all these things. So that's what philanthropy needs to do. You need to reassess and evaluate what you do. And if you're part of the problem, you need to also take direct steps to correct that. If you're part of the problem, you need to come up with a solution for that, but don't keep perpetuating the system where we actually come to you for crumbs, literally. You know, I have a conversation with some program officers for like $2,000, you know, not even $1,000 sometimes, and then maybe do this loan applications where they even ask me for my type of blood and social security number and all these things, and for $5,000 or less. So honestly, we need to make it easier for the people that are doing the work. If we're doing the work, just, you know, automatic renewal, right? Multi-year funding, 5 to 7 years, right? Endowment, give us the money for the endowment so we can actually be sustainable. And I can go on and on and on, but one thing that really sometimes I shake my head is when funders try to lead their own campaigns. They come out with all these campaigns and they come to you and they say, we're gonna lead this initiative and then we're gonna put you to work together with so and so and so. They know that people don't work together. If you know that those organizations don't work together, why are we trying to force them into a forced marriage, basically? Because people will join those things because they want the money. They will join those collectives because they want the money. But you know that those things are not gonna work. So stop creating your own programs. Actually find the people that are doing the work already.
That could be the next, and I'm gonna make a pitch for the next color of ed to also include philanthropy. I have lots and lots of thoughts, and I'm on that side, right? So there have been plugs in the chat. I encourage you all to check out the Decolonizing Wealth Project. Lots of good work happening, lots of workshops that we can maybe share as a resource. And it should be just like relationship-based education, there needs to be relationship-based philanthropy, and it needs to make sense. So we are, and I'm gonna check with Ashley to keep us honest about the time, because if not, we will just keep going. But I think we're at the end of our time. So I do want to open it up and just thank our really gracious panel for your expertise and your voice. There were so many nuggets of truth. I was trying not to snap on camera, but I was feeling you wholeheartedly. And any last nuggets are so welcome.
I would just like to say as a last nugget, in some cases, if you can afford it, just small things matter. One of the things that we did was to actually, as a committee, we donated money out of our own pockets. and just made a decision that we were going to help people in the community, that we knew that through principals, we connected with the school district, and through principals, they told us these are ones that right now at the very beginning of the pandemic did not have access to internet in their home and could not afford it. We went in our own pockets. We had members of the NAACP of Wilson. We reached out to them. They gave us money to help those families actually get their internet paid for about a half a year. And so sometimes you just have to, like you said, if you can't get the bigger pots of money, sometimes just, go to your local organizations, go to your banks in the area that reach out, that have community work efforts that they do at banks. Do that. If you can't get a big pot, get a little bit, but make sure you apply it to what the community actually needs.
Yeah, we did let the corporate, there was a part about the corporate sector too. We did let them off the hook a little bit, but more. We'll get
I
it.
have something to say about that. Just let me know.
I'd like to thank you so much for having us here today, and my fellow panel members did such a wonderful job of illuminating all of this stuff. And I'd also just like to leave by saying that when we are interacting with our schools, I think it's really important to ask who is at the table, the decision-making table. And I think you should ask specific questions. How long have they lived in this community? You should also, and that's not saying that people who are new to the community don't have input, but oftentimes we ignore the people who have been there for a long period of time. So we need to ask, who is at this table? And how many people without degrees do you have here? How many people who have not had such a good positive experience with this system is also here? And I think we really, really need to interrogate this narrative. And I think that if we form these coalitions that we were talking about, these Black-Brown coalitions, I think it will afford us an opportunity to have some of these folks at the table, or at least to demand that. I'm from the Ella Baker and Septima Clark School. I believe that we need to grow leaders from inside of our community, and I know that we can do it. I started this segment by saying, and the same thing I'll end, we need to be organizers. And I also would like to throw a non-shameless plug for the program that I am working not only with EOMA, but I also have a program, DanitaMasonHogans.com. There's an S on the end of my name. Please go and find out some of the work that we're doing under Bridging the Gap and some of that work. And please contribute to our collaboration, because it's our collaboration that brings us power, and the people are never without power. Thank you so much.
I just want to say thank you to everyone on the panel. Thank you, Nikki, for being our moderator. You all were very inspiring. I learned a lot today. I'm sure everyone who attended learned a lot. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sharing my screen right now because we do have a couple of housekeeping items before everyone leaves. We're going to get you out of here at 6. I promise you can go eat dinner if you're not already getting you something. So excuse that 4, it should be 3, but you have 3 action steps. Please complete the Color of Education Key Takeaway Graphic Organizer. We can place that link in the chat as well if you do not have it. If you do not have it, let me know. Please complete the evaluation link. So a couple of you who have already asked about the CEUs. If you want CEUs, you have to complete our evaluation link, which will be placed in the chat shortly. Also, as we stated earlier, please connect with us via Twitter or social media. Share your biggest aha moment from today. We had some real speakers up here today. I was back here snapping, Nikki, so I know you couldn't do it, but I was back here doing it for you because some of these were real wisdom words. This was the real things that you can take back. So use that and put it into your graphic organizer. Use it for your aha moments when you're sitting in rooms with folks and you're like, okay, well, let me have this conversation with this person right here because we're not talking about this and we need to be talking about it. This is what this is for. We enjoyed having you today. We also want to send our final thank you to our funders for this year's Color of Education. It would not have happened without you all. Thank you so, so much. We have the Burroughs Welcome Fund, Blue Cross Blue Shield, our Participate Learning, Peter and Sandra Conway, the Learning Platforms, Watson Shaw, Wells Fargo. I'm not going to read them all out, but I just want to say thank you. It means a lot to us that you support the Color of Education and support everyone here. So thank you so much. And just to left it off, we do have the graphic organizer. If you need that link or if you need the PDF, let us know. The eval link is coming, everyone. It is coming. It is coming. So we have put the eval link in the chat. If you need that link, please utilize it. You will be able to get your CEUs through the link, the evaluation link today. And again, thank you. Does anyone need anything else from me? Please let us know in the chat.
We can't say goodnight though without thanking obviously the Public School Forum and Ashley. I know how hard you've worked. I know I was harassing you with tons of questions. So thank you for putting on another really successful Color of Ed conference. We are incredibly grateful. I always feel motivated. So wow, thank you.
Well, I'm honored. Honestly, I say this all the time, but I am honored to be in a room with you all. You just don't understand how I am inspired every single year. Every single year you speak, you all come here, you all have collaborated with us in some way for Color of Education and the Dudley Flood Center. And so just know that your words, your voice, your platform, everything that you all do is appreciated. And it is well valued. Thank you so much.